Caitlin Clark just said something that should have been obvious. She suggested maybe, just maybe, the WNBA players should compromise and get back on the court instead of risking the entire 2026 season. Common sense, right? Wrong. WNBA Twitter erupted. The backlash was immediate. And suddenly, the rookie who just saved the league is being painted as anti-union, as weak, as someone who doesn't understand solidarity. But here's what nobody's talking about. The people attacking her, they own a competing league. And those 3 anonymous players who voted against the strike authorization, they might be the only ones thinking clearly right now. The WNBA Players Association just authorized a strike. The vote wasn't close. 93% voted yes. 154 players participated. Only 3 said no. And the union is celebrating this as unprecedented solidarity, as proof that the players are united and ready to fight. But let's dig into what's actually happening here, because the story behind this vote is way more complicated than anyone's admitting. And Caitlin Clark just became the sacrificial lamb for daring to point out the obvious problems with this strategy. If you believe the story behind the story matters, if you think there's more going on here than just players fighting for fair pay, hit that like button. It tells us we're on the right track. Because what we're about to uncover isn't just about a labor dispute. It's about conflicting interests, questionable timing, and a rookie superstar who's being attacked for refusing to play along with a narrative that doesn't add up. So let's start with the basics. The strike authorization happened. 93% of WNBA players voted yes. That's 154 players out of approximately 166 in the league. 3 voted no. Nobody knows who those 3 are. The union hasn't identified them. The media hasn't found them. They're anonymous. And maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe those 3 players understand something the other 151 don't. Or maybe they just can't afford to gamble with their careers the way the stars can. Because here's the thing many of you have been saying for weeks. This strike authorization is happening in the off-season. There are no games being played. No revenue is being generated. So what exactly are they striking from? Their couches. It's the equivalent of threatening to quit a job you don't currently have. The timing makes 0 sense unless this is purely a PR move designed to pressure the league through public opinion rather than actual economic leverage. A strike only works when you have leverage, when you can hurt the other side by withholding your labor. But right now, there's nothing to withhold. The season's over. Players are overseas or training or running their businesses. The league isn't losing money because the games aren't happening anyway. So what's the point of the vote? What's the actual threat here? The threat is that they might not play in 2026. That's what this is really about. The strike authorization is a warning. If we don't get what we want by the January 9th deadline, we're prepared to blow up the season. And that's where Caitlin Clark comes in. Because she looked at this situation, looked at the calendar, looked at the momentum the league finally has, and she said what a lot of people are thinking but afraid to tweet. We need to compromise and get back on the court. She wasn't breaking ranks. She wasn't anti-union. She was being realistic. She understands that missing a season would be devastating for everyone involved. The league just had its best year ever. Viewership was up. Attendance was up. Sponsors were paying attention. And now we're talking about potentially throwing all of that away over negotiations that, reading between the lines, seem closer to resolution than anyone's admitting. But WNBA Twitter went after her anyway. You were onto something when you noticed the response felt coordinated, felt aggressive, felt like it was coming from people with something to lose if Clark's message gained traction. Because apparently wanting to actually play basketball in 2026 makes you a problem now. Apparently suggesting that compromise might be smarter than confrontation means you don't support your fellow players. Nneka Ogwumika said something similar. She wants a good deal, but she also wants a season. She understands they need to put the product on the court for it to be valued. That's not controversial. That's economics. You can't grow revenue if there's no product generating revenue. But when the narrative is all about unity and fighting the system, Anyone who suggests moderation gets painted as weak or disloyal. Now let's talk about those 3 players who voted no. Nobody knows who they are, but I'd bet everything they're not the stars. They're not Breanna Stewart or A'ja Wilson or Napheesa Collier. They're probably middle-tier or lower-tier players, the ones making league minimum, the ones without overseas contracts or endorsement deals or ownership stakes in competing leagues, the ones who understand that if there's a lockout or a strike, they're the ones who get hurt the most. Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier own Unrivaled. They're getting paid regardless. The top stars have overseas deals, endorsement money, alternative revenue streams. But what about player number 8 on the bench who makes the league minimum and has no other options? What happens to her when there's no season and no paycheck? Those 3 no votes represent the players who can't afford to gamble with their careers. And honestly, they might be the only ones being realistic about what a work stoppage would actually mean. Connecting the dots reveals something uncomfortable. The people leading this push for strike authorization, the people attacking Caitlin Clark for suggesting compromise, they have financial interests in what happens if the WNBA season doesn't occur. Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart are sitting at the negotiation table as player representatives, but they also own Unrivaled, a competing league. The union president just signed with Project B, another competing league. You've got restaurant owners negotiating the closure of their competition while claiming they're just fighting for worker rights. And we're supposed to believe there's no conflict here. If the WNBA season doesn't happen, where do fans go? Unrivaled. Project B. These alternative leagues suddenly become the only game in town. I'm not saying that's the intention, but you can't ignore the optics. You can't ignore that the people with the loudest voices for confrontation are the same people who profit if the WNBA takes a year off. And here's the uncomfortable truth that's going to get me destroyed in the comments, but someone needs to say it. The fans aren't going to follow. You think casual viewers who just discovered Caitlin Clark last season are going to hunt down unrivaled games or figure out how to watch Project B? Not happening. Let's filter out the noise and look at what actually happens when audiences are asked to follow content to new platforms. Joe Rogan went to Spotify. Alex Cooper went to Spotify. How many casual listeners actually followed them there? A fraction. And these are massive personalities with dedicated fan bases. Now they're back on YouTube because exclusivity killed their reach. The same thing will happen with women's basketball if it fractures into competing leagues. The WNBA has spent decades building infrastructure, media deals, and visibility. You don't just replicate that overnight. Unrivaled might have funding and star power, but it doesn't have the ecosystem. Project B is still a mystery. We haven't even seen what their product looks like yet. And neither of these leagues can absorb an entire roster of WNBA players, even if they wanted to. So when players talk about having options, about being able to play elsewhere if the WNBA doesn't meet their demands, they're overestimating their leverage. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Caitlin Clark was right to call for compromise, or should the players hold out for everything they're demanding, even if it risks the season? Because this is the conversation that matters. This is what's actually at stake. The harsh reality is this: if there's no 2026 WNBA season, the league loses, but the players lose more. The league can wait. It's weathered financial losses before. It has the NBA backing it. It can absorb a year without basketball and come back. The infrastructure stays in place. The media deals eventually return. The brand survives. But can the players? Can they afford to lose a full season of salary, exposure, and career progression? Can they afford to watch their hard-earned momentum from last season evaporate while fans move on to the next thing? Because momentum in sports is everything. And right now, the WNBA finally has it. Finally has mainstream attention. Finally has cultural relevance. Finally has viewership numbers that make advertisers pay attention. You don't risk that over a negotiation when compromise is possible. Here's what the league said in response to the strike authorization, and pay attention, because this is important. They called out the union for fundamentally misrepresenting the negotiations. They said they're offering significant immediate salary increases with a new uncapped revenue sharing model. Uncapped. That means as revenue grows, player salaries grow automatically with no ceiling. That's not nothing. That's actually a massive shift from the current structure, but the union keeps saying the offers are a slap in the face, that the league is putting lipstick on a pig. So who's telling the truth? Is the league actually offering substantial improvements, and the union is holding out for an unrealistic deal? Or is the league lowballing and trying to spin it as generosity? The problem is, we don't know because these negotiations are happening behind closed doors and both sides are playing the PR game. But here's what we do know. The league's public statements have been measured, professional, focused on the specifics of their offer. Meanwhile, the union has been throwing around inflammatory phrases and organizing strike votes that feel more like media spectacles than serious negotiating tactics. And when Caitlin Clark suggested maybe they should focus on getting a deal done rather than threatening to blow everything up, she became the target. Many of you have been saying this for weeks. The response to Clark felt disproportionate. It felt coordinated. It felt like people were waiting for someone to break from the narrative so they could make an example of them. And Clark was the perfect target because she's the face of the league's recent success. If you can paint her as anti-union, as not supporting her fellow players, you can silence anyone else who might be thinking the same thing. But here's what's really happening. The three players who voted no understand something the majority don't. They understand that sometimes winning means knowing when to take the deal on the table rather than gambling everything on a better offer that might never come. They understand that the perfect can be the enemy of the good. But they're being drowned out by the 93% who voted yes, by the PR machinery of the union, by the narrative that any compromise is weakness. Let's talk about what happens if they actually go through with this. If we hit January 9th and there's no deal, if we actually get a lockout or a strike. Fans who tuned in for the first time last season because of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, they don't care about revenue splits and collective bargaining. They just want to know if there's going to be games to watch. And if this drags on, if the season gets delayed or canceled, I genuinely believe it could set the league back years. Not because the players don't deserve more, they absolutely do. The WNBA has been underpaying its athletes for decades. The revenue sharing model needs to change. Nobody's disputing that. But there's a difference between fighting for what you deserve and overplaying your hand. There's a difference between negotiating from strength and negotiating from fantasy. Right now, despite what the strike authorization suggests, the players have less leverage than they think. The league knows they won't actually strike during the offseason because there's nothing to strike from. The league knows alternative leagues can't replace the WNBA's infrastructure. The league knows fans won't follow a fractured product across multiple platforms. So what's the end game here? Either the union is playing hardball and will eventually compromise, which means all of this drama was theater, or they're genuinely prepared to blow up the 2026 season over demands they might not get, which means everyone loses: the players, the league, the fans, and most importantly, the sport itself. And the people who will suffer most aren't Brianna Stewart or Nafisa Collier or Aja Wilson. It's those three anonymous players who voted no. It's the bench players. It's the rookies who need exposure to build their brands. Here's my prediction, and you can clip this and roast me later if I'm wrong. They get a deal done. It won't be the 30% revenue split the union keeps demanding. The league isn't budging on that. But salaries will increase significantly, maybe more than expected. The revenue sharing model will change in ways that benefit players long term, and everyone will declare victory. The union saves face by saying they fought hard and won substantial gains. The league saves face by maintaining their overall revenue structure, but the damage is already done. The public bickering, the strike authorization, the conflict of interest allegations, the attacks on Caitlin Clark for suggesting compromise, it's all left a bad taste. Casual viewers who just want to watch basketball are tired of hearing about CBA negotiations, and if this drags on past January 9th, if we actually hit a work stoppage, those casual fans won't wait around. They'll move on, and getting them back will be exponentially harder than keeping them engaged. The 3 players who voted no understand this. Caitlin Clark understands this. Nneka Ogbumike understands this. They're not weak. They're not anti-union. They're being realistic about what's at stake and what happens if this goes sideways. But in the current environment, realism gets you labeled a traitor. Suggesting compromise gets you attacked on social media, and asking whether the people leading the charge might have conflicting interests gets you accused of undermining the movement. Reading between the lines, the league's offer is probably better than the union is publicly admitting. The union's demands are probably more flexible than their rhetoric suggests, and the whole thing will likely resolve before we lose any games. But the fact that we're even talking about this, the fact that the league's biggest growth moment in history is being overshadowed by labor disputes and internal conflicts, that's the real problem. If you've made it this far, if you want to see how this resolves and whether the WNBA can actually capitalize on the momentum Caitlin Clark created, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Because January 9th is coming fast, and when that deadline hits, we're either getting a deal or we're getting chaos. And I'll be here breaking down exactly what it means for the league, for the players, and for the future of women's basketball. Next video, we're diving into the actual numbers behind the league's offer and what the union is really demanding. Because there's a reason both sides are being vague about specifics, and it's not what you think. Until then, let's hope cooler heads prevail. Let's hope the 3 players who voted no and the rookies who just want to play basketball get heard. And let's hope the people attacking Caitlin Clark realize she might be the best thing that ever happened to their negotiating position, even if she's not following their script.